The courtroom was as noisy as a pot of boiling water. Whispers echoed between the rows of seats. Lawyers in neat suits, their shiny shoes tapping rhythmically on the wooden floor, flipping through documents with solemn expressions. At the highest position, Judge Thomas sat majestically on the chair. His face was the embodiment of authority. His cold eyes swept across the tense room. Outside the window, pale yellow sunlight tried to penetrate the thick curtains. But here, in this room, there seemed to be only pressure, eerie silence, and scrutinizing gazes. Then suddenly, the door to the courtroom creaked. Everyone turned their heads at once. A teenager walked in. Henry, 17 years old, clutching a worn-out briefcase. His oversized coat made him look small, almost out of place among the expensive suits of the veteran lawyers. His gait was uncertain, but his gaze was steady, like a fire burning in a storm. Henry stopped in the middle of the room, looking around as if trying to anticipate the upcoming challenges. The atmosphere changed as he walked towards the defendant's table, curious and contemptuous gazes following his every step. Judge Thomas frowned, his lips curling into a small smile. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice dry and cold as ice. Henry straightened up, mustering up all his courage to answer. "Your Honor, I am representing my mother." The answer was short, but resounding like a thunderclap in a clear sky. The room fell silent before whispers quickly erupted like flames spreading through the rows. A teenager representing himself in court? No one had ever seen anything like it. Henry's life was a series of challenging days. After his father died in a work accident, his mother became the sole breadwinner of the family. But then, a legal dispute with the landlord, a rich and powerful man, caused them to be evicted from the only home they had. With nowhere else to go, Henry and his mother wandered around, living on the kindness of strangers. Not having enough money to hire a lawyer, Henry decided to stand up and fight for himself. Every night, under the dim light of his makeshift room, he read law books enthusiastically, taking notes of every clause and every precedent. There were nights when his eyes were heavy, but his heart never allowed him to give up. Today, Henry came here not only to protect his mother, but also to affirm one thing: justice should not be the privilege of the rich. The landlord's lawyer, a silver-haired man with a smug expression, stood up and sneered, "Boy, the court is not a place for games. You'd better leave before you waste everyone's time." Henry did not respond to the provocation. He opened his worn briefcase and took out a neatly arranged file. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling slightly but determined, "I am prepared to prove that this eviction is unlawful." The room seemed to hold its breath. Henry began his presentation. He laid out a timeline of events, pointing out each violation of the lease by the landlord. Each sentence was backed up with evidence, specific legal terms that he had studied for months. Judge Thomas looked at him curiously at first, but then his eyes turned serious. Henry's arguments were clear and sharp. The lawyers in the room stopped tapping their pens, instead silently following his every word. When Henry held up the eviction document, the piece of paper that had haunted him and his mother, the room's attention seemed to focus on him. "Your Honor," Henry said, his voice sharp, "this is the evidence the plaintiff used. But if you look closely, you will see something unusual." He pointed to the signature at the bottom of the page. "This signature belongs to a notary who retired 2 years before this document was signed." The room exploded. Whispers and surprised looks turned toward the landlord and his lawyer. The silver-haired man's face was white, and his lawyer was confused, unable to say a word. Henry continued, presenting more evidence that the landlord had deliberately falsified the document to force his family to leave. Each detail was presented convincingly, combining sharp reason and sincere emotion, making the entire courtroom listen. After a while of debate, Judge Thomas removed his glasses, looking at Henry with a thoughtful gaze. "Mr. Henry," he said, his voice low but full of emotion, "what you have done today not only protected your mother's rights, but also reminded us all that justice can be done, even when the person seeking it has no power in his hands." The room held its breath as the judge pronounced his sentence. The deportation order is reversed. The plaintiff must pay all damages, including the cost of emotional distress. Applause broke out, defying the rules of the courtroom. Everyone turned to look at Henry, no longer a small teenager, but a symbol of courage and determination. After the hearing, Judge Thomas approached Henry and placed his hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just represent your mother today," he said. "You represented all the forgotten. You just proved that justice is not a commodity for sale." Henry's story quickly spread. Strangers felt empowered. In a world full of injustice, the story of a 17-year-old boy inspired the belief that truth and love can change the world. Henry walked out of the courtroom, the golden afternoon sunlight covering his tired face, but his eyes were bright with joy and victory. Perhaps the most miraculous thing was not that the 17-year-old boy defeated a force greater than himself, but that his love for his mother gave him the strength to overcome his limitations. Courage is not the absence of fear, but knowing how to put faith and love above fear. Henry's story reminds us that in every step of perseverance, if there is love as a guiding light, no obstacle is too great, and no situation is hopeless. And that is also the greatest lesson of life. Sometimes, courage and love are the keys to opening the door to extraordinary things. The power of courage and love. Do you know, if it were not for courage and love, Martin Luther King Jr. would have died, could not make his dream come true, and perhaps now we do not have a holiday to lie on the sofa eating cookies and thinking about equal rights. It sounds funny, but it is true. Henry in our story is also a little giant in everyday life. Facing pressure from powerful people, he did not give up. What helped him overcome his fear? It was his intense love for his mother and the courage to stand up and fight for what was right. You see, courage is not the absence of fear. Who does not tremble before a challenge? But there is something stronger than fear: love. Henry taught us a simple but powerful lesson. When you love someone enough, all limits can be broken. He is not a lawyer nor a genius, but it is love that gives him the strength to win a battle that everyone thought he would lose. How about you? Have you ever done something you thought was impossible because you loved someone or something? Have you ever found yourself unexpectedly courageous, even when you thought you were weak? Albert Einstein once said, "Only one thing matters: love." And we think that's true in every situation. Love is more than a feeling. It's an action, a decision to put the happiness of another person above your fear or comfort. It was through love that Henry found his courage, and it was through love that Martin Luther King Jr. made his dreams come true. Remember, even the smallest actions can do wonders, as long as they're done with love. So if you're feeling too small for your good, try to find something you love deeply. That love will guide you, just as it did for Henry. If you find yourself experiencing an extraordinary moment thanks to courage and love, please share your story in the comments. We would love to hear from you and spread the good news. Henry has proven that love and courage can light up the darkest path. But sometimes love alone is not enough. If Henry had not stood up and faced injustice, justice would have been buried forever under the power of the powerful. Indeed, justice does not seek the weak. It only appears when we dare to stand up and demand it. And the question is, in this world full of injustice, are you willing to become a game changer like Henry did? Just one small step, you can make a big difference. Justice is not for the strong, but for those who stand up. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Just think, if we all just keep quiet and bow our heads, who will stand up to change the world? Now imagine, not a great leader, but just your neighbor boy, yes, Henry, walking into a courtroom and making the impossible happen. Wouldn't that be a miracle of courage? Justice is a majestic word, but it is not something distant or reserved for the strong. Justice is like a close friend. It is always waiting for you to stand up and call its name. If you don't stand up, it will remain dormant, covered in dust by fear and silence. Remember, Henry was no superhero. He was just a 17-year-old boy, small in a powerful courtroom. But he dared to stand up for his mother, for justice. And that action created a powerful wave of emotion, spreading to millions of hearts. Now think about your life. Have you ever felt that you were being treated unfairly, but thought, "What the hell? I can't do anything"? If so, remember Henry's story. He had no money, no power, not even experience. But he had something more important: the belief that justice is for everyone, as long as you are brave enough to demand it. Have you ever wondered, if Henry had not dared to step into the courtroom, what would have happened? Yes, his mother would have lost her home, and justice would have been stifled by the powerful. But thanks to Henry, we see that true strength lies not in power or fame, but in perseverance and the belief that what is right will prevail. Martin Luther King Jr. did not say that justice would come. He said that we must act to preserve it. This is true in every aspect of life. Whether you stand up for your family, your co-workers, or even simply yourself, don't wait for a superhero to appear, because the superhero is you. The one who dares to speak up, dares to act. So the next time you encounter injustice, ask yourself, if Henry can do it, why can't I? Even if it's just a small act, it can change not only your life, but also the lives of those around you. What about you? Have you ever stood up for something important? Comment below and tell your story. Who knows, you might be the inspiration for someone else to stand up, like Henry did. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. Every view, every moment you spend accompanying this story is a precious gift to us. It is you, with your sympathetic heart and sharing, that have made small stories like Henry's have the power to touch millions of hearts. We live in a world full of challenges, but we believe that when we spread love, courage, and faith and justice together, each person's small actions can change lives for the better. If this story makes you feel warm, click like to express your sympathy. Share to spread this message to more people. And don't forget to leave an inspirational sentence in the comment section. Who knows? Your story or words may be the guiding light for someone struggling in the dark. Let's create a community where stories of kindness and courage are shared and cherished. Because each of us has the power to change the world. We just need to stand up and start.